Empire.
Hello and welcome to another live stream edition of the John Keim Report. Do me a favor, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And there's nobody here, Sam. Hold on one second. Here we go. There are people here, Sam. I made a mistake there. I didn't see anybody in there for a minute, so I wasn't sure if we had the right link there, but we do. So there you go. That's something. Usually we have a bunch of people in here right away, and there weren't any in there. So I thought maybe I messed up with the link. Anyways, I did not. That's Sam Fortier from the Washington Post. Of course, you can see him there. You can read his work in the Washington Post. You can read my work on ESPN.com. Anyways, so Sam, today we're going to start with this because it's a significant step for the team getting back to the site at RFK. Fill us in on, well, basically it was included in the spending bill. How likely is this to pass?
Hold on. We are absolutely starting with you making an incredible dad move where you thought that.
Well, because there's always comments here before we get going, and there's always people on there when we get going, and it was just late showing up. That's why I thought, oh, did I screw something up? That's why.
You're good. I'm just giving you a hard time.
No, it was definitely. I'm like, oh, I did something wrong.
Yeah. I mean, it is a massive deal that this bill got included in the spending bill, which is going to pass, is expected to pass at some point this weekend. I've been covering this with my colleagues for a long time, and just to put it in context, the Commanders and DC. They have always tried to secure legislation basically by throwing Hail Marys, by slipping in a bill at the very last minute that didn't go through all the process. So this year, I met with someone involved with this process in I think it was April 2023, very start of this Congress, and they gave this thing a 20% chance of passing. Right. And basically what you've seen over the last 2 years is starting at your own 10-yard line. They drove it down the field, right? They passed the House committee. They passed the House with big bipartisan support. They passed the Senate subcommittee with a big bipartisan support vote. So what you're seeing is a different strategy than they've had in the past. It's a different outcome than they've had in the past, and this paves the way not necessarily for the Commanders to return, though that seems very possible. But DC will now be able to debate within itself, have control over the land, and say, do we want to use this for a football stadium, which is more progress than they've had in the last 20 years.
Right. And it does certainly seems like from the team's perspective, I mean, clearly this is where they want to go. And so I think, it feels like for them, the optimism level raises from, I mean, shoot, Sam, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, it felt like it was a 25% chance that they return there. Once this goes through, that shoots way up.
Yeah, and it's a 2-jurisdiction competition now. You can forget about Virginia.
Right,
and like you said, I think the team has talked about the emotional tug of, the spiritual home of the franchise. I think that there would have to be a gap between whatever Maryland would offer and DC would offer, that you'd take less to go to DC. We don't know exactly what those deals look like. The mayor of DC has talked about, hey, we'll do the horizontal work, prepare the land, do some infrastructure, as opposed to a direct cash subsidy, which they gave to Monumental for the Wizards and Capitals. I think DC can still do both. I don't think that will hinder them. But obviously this is, if you're a Commanders fan who wanted to see them back at RFK, this is it's really hard to overstate how important today is.
Right. And I think it has felt like the momentum is really there for them to get back there again because of this and working up to this, because they certainly seemed like they were working hard on the folks in Maryland to get them to play ball here. Right.
As my colleagues and I reported last week, the mayor of DC last week in a closed door meeting accused Maryland of holding DC hostage. She used the word hostage in this negotiation because Maryland basically was saying, not giving the green light to include the RFK bill because they wanted other things. In Maryland, it should be pointed out, in this spending bill, they're coming away with the Air National Guard squadron that they wanted, as well as full funding for the Key Bridge rebuild. They went from 90% to 100%. So Maryland got what they were looking for, DC got what they were looking for, and the Commanders got what they were looking for, as well as the league, because now DC is on the table.
And I will say, like, the vision when you hear them talk about like what they would want from a stadium, it includes shots of downtown leading into the stadium, right? And I know like the mayor would want a dome stadium, but like that's what I think there's a vision, and that vision has typically included like what they could do at RFK.
And I think this is honestly bigger for the city than just having the Commanders. Obviously, that's a big part of it.
Right.
But when you think about, hey, Taylor Swift's tour didn't come here. We didn't get a World Cup game. Like, if you're going to be an international capital city of import, you need to have the ability to host events like that. These are
Yeah.
global chances to show off what your city can do. And so I think the mayor is thinking like, hey, like we got to go bigger. And this is obviously a big step toward realizing that dream.
And it also seems like they need to build some housing down there and some things there for the community too. Because if it's just a stadium, I think there are people who would want to fight that because they're going to want more than just a stadium.
Oh, I think that like what you're probably talking about is the next Navy Yard. Like you're talking about a mixed use development with residential, commercial, probably, hotels. Like I think that like, I don't know, I drive past that thing every week on the way to Northwest Stadium, and it's 190 acres. There's a lot you can do there. And I think you're going to see a lot, but if they do it, because the residents of that area, I think, are going to have something to say, because traffic and noise, with broccoli and some of the events that they have over there now. Like I've seen emails to the council members who are in charge of that area, and there's certainly going to be a big fight over this in city council.
Yeah, and that'll be the key, is because there will be hurdles that remain. It just seems like they've knocked down a few already to get to this point. And, certainly the desire is to get back there. And so it's a matter of, can you pull it off? Can you get the council on board? Can you get the residents on board? What do you have to do to get them on board? And then, because you're right, like, here's the thing, they would want the dome stadium, right? And so, because you could host a Final Four if you get a dome, if you do that possibly. So like, there's all sorts of things you can do, which means lots and lots of traffic around that area. So
I personally love watching football outside, especially in the elements in the winter. I'm not playing, so I can say that. But like a dome, like you said, it just opens you up for so many more events. Like that's going to be, I think, a pretty big point.
And I think to sell this to the community or to the council, like what's in it for DC other than just this? If you're going to give a lot of money away, you're going to want to make a lot of money back. And so like the way you do that, is by getting more shows in there. And it's funny because way back when this team first started looking at stuff, they wanted to create their own little city somewhere. Well, that's off the table. Like, you can only do so much there for the team, and the practice facility most likely would still be, I'm going to still strongly guess, in Virginia, but they're not going to have the practice facility down there either. So,
and I think that, kind of to your point, over the weekend, I obtained the memorandum of understanding, non-binding, between Maryland and DC and the Commanders that they were negotiating. And basically, while it's non-binding, like the Commanders still want to develop those 200 acres that they have in that area. And I think you're going to see potentially a youth sports complex, which, Josh Harris owns a lot of youth sports properties. You're going to see residential, commercial, like, there's money to be made on that site, whatever it is. And Maryland has talked about developing that area known as the Blue Line Corridor. Like, there's going to be something there. It's just, it just might not be a stadium.
Right. And it's, and it's funny too, because along those lines, one of the reasons why in the past they wanted to do that is because you then have a steadier flow of money, and you're not just relying upon the team winning or losing. How successful is a franchise? You always have that influx of money, which when in this day and age with these teams, like, that's a good thing to have. And these guys, I mean, you have a bunch of successful businessmen, including, before, just besides Josh Harris, Mark Ian, Mitch Rales, Magic is also, and among others. So like, that's a key point here, but it was always designed to always make sure that your bottom line is not dependent on, did you sell enough season tickets? Did you sell enough suites? Whatever. So, there you go. Anything else we need to go on that, Sam? It's a huge step.
It's a huge step. the rubber stamp moment is going to come sometime, by Friday, Saturday, Sunday, something
Right.
like that. And when it officially passes, it'll be law, and you'll be good to go. It's extremely, extremely unlikely that something has happened between now and then, which is why I feel like we're presenting it in this way, because when things like this happen, when a bill like this gets introduced, it's really hard to pull things out. So just that one more note that, like, there's a Hail Mary shot that something could happen, but really, I think this is it. This is what you need to know.
There you go. So now let's get to the product in the field, because there is a big game coming up this week, and it's unusual. We're sitting here on December 17th talking about a team with 9 wins and what, basically, well, if you beat Atlanta, you're going to be in almost 90%, 95% assured, unless something crazy happens with the Seahawks and the Rams winning their next couple of games, tying in the finale, and both going 10-6-1. Otherwise, you'll be in. So where do you think after Sunday, how do you assess where they are right now? We know 9-5 and all that, but how do you assess them after that game Sunday?
It was a little bit difficult considering how weird that game Sunday was. But to me, you come out of it with a win. Jaden still looked good. We can talk about the 8 sacks. I think there's a lot of nuance there at another time, later on. But I think that really as a team, you got to feel pretty good coming out of it. Even though you lose Zach Ertz, potentially, it sounds like he could come back this weekend, but you're down on offense. But to me, still, like, for the team to grit it out in that moment, even after the clock mess up, it was impressive. They got a win. A win is a win, especially at this time of the year. So you should feel confident if you're a Commanders fan about their ability to handle business down the stretch, considering that they're in, pole position to get a wild card spot.
Sure. And with the 8 sacks, because Juan here asked about, are we concerned about the number of sacks allowed? I would be more concerned if it was a steady issue. And this is, to me, that was a one-game aberration. And I also think there are a couple of different reasons for it. I think Biadasz makes a difference. It wasn't just that. I'm not going to pin all the blame on Michael Dieter, because you saw if Brandon Coleman's getting beat, it's not because of Michael Dieter's not there, right? But there are some things that he helps with for sure in that area. And then there are I think it was like 3 of them where Jaden, was it 3 maybe, where he ran out of bounds for no yards. Like you
2.
throw the ball, 2 of them. Okay, 2 of them. You throw that away, that's not a sack. But, anyway, so are you concerned about it?
No, I went back and I studied all 8 sacks. Yeah. I think really I would say 3, maybe 3.5 were his fault. A couple, like you mentioned, Brandon Coleman got beat. The weirdest one I thought was the 7th sack. It was 2nd and 14 at the +28. They're in like good field goal range, and he takes a pretty big sack, and he had the ball for 6 seconds. So
right.
To me, like, that's a 5-yard loss, sets up 3rd and long, and like you're playing with field goal position there. The other ones were on 3rd and long. He's trying to make something happen. I wasn't as concerned. Actually, the only other one that I thought was odd was the first one. It was a shot play, 2nd and 10, I think the Commanders were on their own 37.
Yeah.
And Jaden, like, Terry and Diami are running deep. He doesn't see it. And then he motions to throw the check down, and then he doesn't throw it. And
to Robinson, but he also had Jamison on the left side wide open. And I think, like, it almost felt like he forgot that he had a guy on the other side as well, because he'd have run for a long time.
Right. And I think the other part of the sacks that we don't discuss as much is when Jaden tucks and runs, when he decides, like, hey, like, it's not there, I'm going to run. Sometimes you have a 4-yard sack. Sometimes you have a 3rd and long conversion on a scramble. Sometimes you have the 3rd and 1, flip. Like, the risk reward of his legs, I think, is very evident. And yes, like, 8 sacks is tied for the 2nd most number of sacks that any quarterback's taken in a game this year. It's the 4th most that any quarterback in this franchise has taken in a game since at least 2000. So it's a big number. I totally understand the concern, but I think that when you go through the tape, when you think about the context of who Jaden is and what he can do, it's okay, and it's a one-game weird thing.
Right, and I'm with you, because, like, I even talked about this when I did my little review of it this morning, that with him, like, because it's always like, well, he just got to throw the ball away. Well, when? Because some of those times, like, he had a 2nd down and 7. He scrambles up the middle. He gets through a tight opening. All right, you throw the ball away, that's fine. It's 3rd and 7, but he gets 6 yards. So you know what I'm saying? Like, what's the answer there? Because I don't think it's as simple as, oh, just throw it away. Also, he is used to getting out of those spots. His whole life has been built getting out of those spots. At what point do you say, like, well, on this one, you do this, because then you start messing with the head a little bit. So I think there are things you can absolutely be better with. And I think the big thing that Dan Quinn has talked about is making sure you keep your eyes upfield. Because there was one time where I felt like his eyes went right down because he knows he's got to sprint. But I think if you keep your eyes upfield, maybe the guy can't charge you the way he does because he knows you're not going to throw. And it may have bought him at least maybe to throw it away or see something else. But that's a hard thing because you're changing a mentality when you do that, or you don't want to mess with the mentality too much. But there's a fine line, isn't there?
I totally agree. And that's why it was interesting to me when we talked to Dan Quinn about those sacks, that he kind of brought up the ones where where he ran out of bounds for 0 yard,
Right.
for no gain. And it's like you said, I think that if Jaden throws those away, you're taking something away from him. And I know that like you're exposing yourself to a late hit or injury or things like that. But this is, when Jaden was 8 years old playing Pop Warner in San Bernardino, California, like this is the guy that he has been, and so I think that and Marcus Mariota has talked about this, like the balance of feeling when he got to Tennessee of I got to stay on the field, I got to stay healthy, and changing the way that he plays. I think you always want a guy to be smart, but at some point you have to say like, we picked this guy because this is who he is, and we have to embrace that.
Right. And it's almost like, in basketball, we both played it, you coach whatever, like if you're a pressing team, you're going to give up some baskets, right, in the press. But is the press taking away a lot more than you're giving up? And if the answer is yes, then sometimes you're just like, well, this is the risk reward of that strategy. And so I think that's what you have to kind of go with. And the big thing is, again, I think the big thing for him is just make sure you keep your eyes upfield, because like it results in the touchdown pass to Terry McLaurin. Big plays result from that. And that's the thing. But like, he's 3rd and 2, he's sprinting for 2 yards and getting a first down. It's a huge play. It's 2 yards. It's a huge play because he can do that. And I would hate, I don't think this will ever happen with him. I don't think they'll take that away from him. But I will be curious to see if there are times where maybe he alters a little bit where, okay, you got nothing here. You're holding the ball for 5 seconds. You got no opening. Just get rid of the ball. Right. But the other thing is too, like when I covered Kirk Cousins, and he came right after Robert, and Colt McCoy was here as well. Colt and Robert were more guys who extended plays and took some sacks because they weren't as quick getting rid of the ball. Kirk Cousins, like his point was, hey, in high school even, I wasn't the best athlete. So he had to train himself to always get rid of the ball when there's nothing there. Whereas these guys, their mentality is, I can make something happen.
I'm surprised you brought up basketball on this live stream because you've seen me in the media room. I'm an elite shooter, and you haven't been playing great defense on me all year. So I'm just surprised that you would make that comparison.
If 1 for 10 is elite, then you are elite.
Yeah, but 1 for 10, I want to be clear, is not my shooting percentage. I'm much higher than that.
2 for 10. Anyways, but that is what you live with it. The other thing I will say, like, he looks like a refreshed guy. He looks whatever was going on, whether it was just, you're beaten down by the season, or not beaten down, but like seems like the last couple games that he's been more of himself.
Yeah. And I think that like that shows up in the scrambling, but I think you can also just see it at the line too. Like, and I think a part of that also could be, the defenses they've been playing. Tennessee and New Orleans, I think was a little bit better, but this is why I think that Philly, I'm really excited for this Philly game, because I think that's going to be a good test of, we saw you on a short week, with a banged up offense and, on the road, there was a lot, and sort of still had some of the rib stuff potentially. Like that was a really tough challenge. And so now I think you're getting a much better litmus test for this offense. And you want to see Zach Ertz come back and things like that, but I think it's going to be a really good measure of where Jaden is at this week.
Yeah, I think because you're seeing a team for the second time, and like how I'm also curious to see how Cliff Kingsbury adapts to what we saw. And I think a preview of that is what we've been seeing from McLaurin the last couple of weeks with, certainly Sunday, more moving around. The other against Tennessee, a little bit more targets on the right side than it was lining up on the right side. And, but last week it was more and more motion. And I think the one game where it really hurt them, where he wasn't on the left side a lot, was the Philly game, because they were really good at taking away things from him. So I'll be curious. But so how does Kingsbury adjust to that? But you're right. Like, that was always a tough ask for them to go up there. Not an excuse. It's just a tough ask. Like, you're short week and you're coming off a very physical game and a loss and et cetera. So I think this will be a good measuring stick. And it also depends too, like, is Zach Ertz available? Because if he's not, that takes something away. You have to adjust. You already lost Noah Brown. You already have Austin Eckler out. So, I think that makes a difference as well. But I am curious to see, Sam, how Kingsbury adjusts to all this as well.
Yeah. And if I can pivot, if I can play host here for
Go
a
ahead.
second.
Go ahead.
Speaking of wide receiver DB matchups, I'm seeing a lot of comments about Marshawn, number 23.
We're going to get him in a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
go ahead. Let's go there now.
Oh, you want to go there now? Okay.
Sure.
So he had 35 coverage snaps on Sunday against New Orleans. He did not get targeted. I thought his influence, I was trying to figure out a word, like, honestly, in the press box after the game when I was writing my story, like, what's the word for anti-gravity? Like gravity pulling things toward you. Yeah. He has like anti-gravity. And that was true even before that game, I should point out. When he was with the Saints, he was targeted on like 9.7% of his coverage snaps this year, which was the second lowest in the league. Don't ask me who was first. I can't remember. But I thought that was really important because of just the way he allows you to play and the respect that opposing offenses have for him. So when he played the Eagles the first time, A.J. Brown missed that game with an injury. So he mostly matched up against Devontae Smith and Jahan Dotson. I think he had like maybe 3 targets. There was a short completion, but really, like, it was, he still was his lockdown self. And so I'm really fascinated to see how the Eagles attack him. It's a different system. There are different people around him. So I think that might change things. But if you're going to play a lot of press, if you're going to play a lot of man, which, we can debate, like, is that the right strategy? But this Eagles offense is obviously very explosive, but their pass game is inconsistent. And so with A.J. Brown back, facing Marshawn Lattimore again, how are they going to attack, and how is Joe Wick going to adjust? Man, like, as I'm talking about it, Kyle, I just get fired up, man. Like, it's fun.
What was interesting with the Saints game, though, it's not even that they barely looked at his side. I mean, honestly, when I was watching it all today, I'm like, I watched all of his snaps today, like, just to see what it looked like. I'm like, oh, it looked like me in CYO ball in 6th grade, where all you did is go to the right. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't have that left hand yet. And he's sitting down there on the defense's right side. They're not going at him ever. And there were a couple of times they looked at him. But one thing that was really important, like, he can play different techniques. And there was one play, and I highlighted this on the thing I did, the game review, showed a couple clips late in there, but that 3rd down and 1, if you remember late in the game, on that last drive the Saints had, where the clock should have expired but didn't. But on that drive, they completed the pass out to the right, the little quick out, and it was on Sammerstill's side. Now, Sammerstill did a nice job all game, but on the other side, I'm watching how Lattimore played the exact same route, and the way he played it compared to the way Sammerstill played it was different, and it was like he knew what was coming. Now, that could be experience. He knows the offense too. Maybe that's part of it. But it was more so like, Sammerstill had kind of backed up a few more yards, and that, so the ability to drive in the ball wasn't the same. But it was that veteran experience that you notice, like, that makes a difference. And then the other thing that I like, Sam, and I don't remember if you asked it on Dan Quinn's thing about the communication, because there were a handful of times where you see him and Jeremy Chin coming up and, like, talking, and Chin would motion to this. And so he'd back up and get a different, but he played it well. In fact, one time they did that, calls him up more. He sits there and pops a tight end, and then he pops a tight end and runs out with the receiver to the side. So it's a play where Luvu should have had the pick. That's the play. Like, so it kind of slowed the guy enough where you get the better drop, et cetera. So, like, he does a lot of things, I think, that are going to help.
The thing that probably impressed me most, other than, like, his physical ability, but his ability to communicate and never seem out of position or confused. Right. It's just not something you see from a guy, in his first game with a new team, especially who changed midseason. But when we went in the locker room and we were talking to Marshawn about it, I said something like, "Did you feel comfortable or whatever?" He's like, he basically was like, shoot, man, I've been here a month. I better be. That's enough time to get acclimated.
Yeah, but it was still impressive. But it's also, I think, the way they communicated with him as well. So I thought it was a good secondary to incorporate a guy. I've covered some secondary, Sam, here that would not be as good with that, and it would have been a disaster. But I feel like Chin, Sam are still like you saw in it, and Noah Igbenogany, like those guys do a good job in that area. In fact, like the corners were not the ones giving up the big pass plays in this game. It wasn't. There was linebackers, it was safeties. It was more of that than it was anything else. So again, I brought up the San Francisco play, and it wasn't to pick on him. It was to highlight how Lattimore played it. And like, can you learn from that too? Right. But really it was, those guys did a good job. And there were a couple of times like on crossing patterns, how you navigate the traffic, little things like that have tripped up this defense before that I thought was handled pretty well the other day.
I just had flashbacks, honestly, like watching the tape. I was like, when they brought in a new corner, William Jackson or whomever, like there were always moments where it was like, oh, well, we had a blown coverage or we had missed assignment or poor communication. And you were just like kind of waiting for that. Just like the last 4 years or the last 40 years for you, we're probably just like twitching a little bit.
Hey, listen, 40 is not that far off from how long it's been. So I can't say too much.
And so I was just, you're waiting for it, and it didn't happen. Obviously, they give up some big plays. And like kind of as a random side note, like, this, we don't have to discuss this, but like, how about the Saints starting Haener over Rattler? Like that's in retrospect, that seems like an incredible botch by them.
It does. But I will say, like, Rattler's the kind of guy too, and Dan Quinn kind of said it's like, he had I don't give a damn mentality. Not that he was like, I'll just be reckless, but shoot, that first one he threw, the deep one, he should have been sacked. He stepped up into what should have been a sack, or not should have been, but he stepped up and made it worse for himself by stepping up. Then that ball, like, how is that ball not picked? And Louvu had one dropped in his hands. So I kept thinking during the game, I told David Aldridge, like, they're going to pick one because he's going to throw it right to them because that's his mentality. But I will say he did a good job. And I agree with you. Like, I don't know what was going on because they both played, he played earlier this year, had some up and downs, but still, he gave them a spark and he challenged them for sure. And I also felt like they got them in some spots with the coverage, like Jeremy Chin on Valdez-Scantling is just, it shouldn't happen, but it did. And it's like, he's not equipped to handle him. So that helped too. But yeah, I agree. I
think part of it was probably, scheme or excuse me, game flow. But Joe Witt was not that aggressive. He might have been aggressive in terms of playing press coverage and playing, some aggressive techniques, but only 6 blitzes in this game, which was the second lowest he's had all year. I'm curious whether he thinks with Marshawn Lattimore, like maybe we play a little bit softer, and force teams to drive the ball down the field, especially against Philly, or do we get more aggressive? I know his DNA is aggressive. I know he wants to get after guys, but I'm curious if that will manifest itself with more blitzing going forward.
And I don't know, because it's like when we had talked to him last week, I even asked him, like, can you do more with your pressure packages? Essentially, because now you have this. He's like, there's not much more we can do. So the answer was no. They're doing a lot, but you're right. The other, because they also use a lot of 3 safety sets too, and so I don't know, does that play into it? How where they were with Kamara, et cetera. But yeah, I am curious to see with Marshawn Lattimore mash up, not just with AJ Brown, but you also have Drake London the next week, and then probably CeeDee Lamb. Like, who knows what state Dallas will be in? Well, I know they're in Texas, but who knows what state the team will be in? That's a dad joke. So anyway, but yeah, so you don't know if he'll play, but those are the guys that you really traded him to get. And the other thing, here's the other thing too, Sam. I meant to say this when you talked about William Jackson. This is the value of bringing in the right guy. William Jackson was never, ever, ever going to be a zone corner. It took me one call to talk to people and talk to more, but one call to find that out. Like, he's never going to be that guy. They panicked because they lost Darby. And so they wanted to get someone, and he was the next guy, but like, he was not going to be that guy. You had a, square peg, round hole kind of situation in that regard. this is not Lattimore. Like they know more about him for sure. And so I think that also helps when you bring in the right guy. It helps communication, et cetera.
And to your point about A.J. Brown, Drake London, C.D. Lamb, on Sunday, Lattimore, I'm going to forget the exact numbers, but it was like 52 of 55 snaps, something like that. He
Right.
played on the left side of the offense, which,
Right.
we should specify the left side of the offense. And
Right.
that's something that he did in New Orleans. And so I'm curious, like, will they move him around, or, was using him on one side just to kind of, get him familiar, get him back on the field? Because I asked Dan Quinn, like, the day they traded for him, do you anticipate him being on one side, or do you anticipate him moving around more? And DQ said, we will move him around more, particularly against these matchup problems. Well, it's about to get real on the field, and we'll see like what they actually do against AJ Brown this week.
Right. No, and it's like I do like the other thing I like too that he brings, and you can see he plays with a little bit of an attitude out there. Not like, but there's and it's hard because he didn't get any targets, but like despite not getting any targets, I will say this, late in the game, he's still handling things the same way, right? You're not falling asleep over there and kind of like, well, they haven't thrown here yet. Why should I worry about it? Because you never know when they will. So, and I think they even looked at him on one of those late plays, and he was doing the same thing he'd always done, right? And so I think the focus was there all the time, but he also has a little bit more physical when he's jamming guys. That helps too. So like, I just think there's a lot that, in fact, when they trade him for him, you hear him like, the dog mentality. And I'm sure you hear this too. Like guys would say they need that in that room, right? Because it's so important. And he has that. So I think there's a lot of good there for him going forward.
It's a real long shot, but it would be really fun if the Commanders and the Buccaneers played again in the playoffs, because you've seen those Lattimore, Mike Evans battles. Like those dudes do not like each other. They go at it. And like, I think that would be a lot of fun.
So here's a question too. And by the way, there's a couple of things because people have asked about Chin and Ertz. All we know is they're in the concussion protocol. So there's not going to be any updates today. We asked that yesterday, the concussion protocol. So you're going to have to wait till Friday or Saturday before we know if they're going to have a chance of playing. So, and then now I don't know that I have a great answer to this one, Sam, but I'm going to read it anyways from E. Any clue as to why the defense doesn't play as well later in the game, the last few minutes of the game, allowing points, touchdowns? So, I mean, I don't know that I have a great answer for that because the other day, part of it was penalties. Part of it was I didn't like the matchup with the Chin thing. There was just some matchup issues. And it probably is a little bit different each game. I don't know that there's a common theme, but do you have one? The common theme for the defense all year has been can't stop the run. But I don't know that that's the only reason why in the fourth quarter they're giving up some stuff.
Right. And like we talked about earlier, different quarterback, pushing the ball down the field, and Joe Witt talked about, that tight end up the seam that's hit them, I think 3 or 4 times for, a couple touchdowns this year. Like that was a check. He said he took it out. Like, I saw a comment that said Joe Witt is the problem. His scheme is the problem in the fourth quarter. I don't think you can point to the Joe Witt scheme and say like, that's the sole problem.
I'd say what? Yeah.
And I think to me, it's like, it's a combination of factors. And like, that's one of the beautiful and frustrating parts about football is that like, it's almost always multifactorial. It's almost always like it's just a difficult thing to isolate. But, like there have been years past where you look at the first half of that Giants game on Sunday Night Football in 2022, when they have a chance to make the playoffs, that was a play calling offensive scheme issue. Like they were asking Taylor Heineke to do things that he could not do. I don't feel like that when I look at this defense. Like you do get some bad matchups, you do get some bad technique or bad luck, or some calls where you're like, I don't know about this. But to me, it's different things, and the run obviously has been a problem.
It does, and like even against like the other day, again, if Frankie Louvu picks that ball off, we're not having the same discussion. And the other thing is if they connect on some of those passes, you may be different. Then against Dallas, for example, it got crazy at the end, but the last offensive touchdown was the tight end. Well, somebody it's supposed to, they gave a look. They're going to rotate to cover 2 afterwards. Quan Martin leaves the middle, rotates to cover 2. Say other safety, Jeremy Chin doesn't drop back. So like is that scheme? Like one guy gets it, one guy doesn't. What happens there? So, and that hasn't happened a ton lately. And then, Steelers, you give up a touchdown, well, St. Juice gets beat. And that's why you have Marshawn Lattimore here to cover that guy in that situation. So not that he can never get beat, but like that was, became a tougher matchup, and it was a good throw by Wilson too. But so there's a different thing, it seems.
Right. And they like DQ and Witt always, like, I feel like every presser we talk to them, they're like ball production,
Right.
produce the ball more. And they have done a better job of it the last couple of weeks, forcing fumbles, getting some picks. But, and to me, like Lattimore for BSJ, like that's a direct upgrade because Lattimore, forces the ball to go other directions. Sanders still obviously benefited from that last weekend. Benjamin St-Juste like has, I think, 1 career pick in 50 something games. And like, just like that's an upgrade on personnel and skill. So if you want to produce the ball more, I think, you start with that.
By the way, I forgot to say, shout out to Miss Fortier. Thank you for listening, as always. So, and I'm sure you guys.
That's crazy disrespectful. You didn't start with that.
I know. I feel bad about that. I also didn't mention, Sammy TikTok, Sammy T Square. Okay. So there you go. But you got to promote the TikTok, man, for you young guys, man. So
that's true.
I'm still working on Facebook. Actually, I don't go on there anymore. Other people want to know too about John Allen. I do think he's going to be back this year. We'll see, but that would be another addition to that defense for the middle to get more depth in there too. So,
and you're saying he'll be back regardless of how deep they go in the postseason. You think he'd be ready for the wild card game? If
I had to bet right now, I think he would be back. But there's still obviously some steps that remain there. But I do think, because he can't, like, that's. Yeah, I'm not reporting that.
I should bet right now that he's going to be back.
But because people are asking about that, but I do think there's a good chance of that. And so you get him back now. You get more depth of line. I know that he and Payne were not playing like Pro Bowlers of a couple years ago, but they're still quality NFL defensive tackles. And the more depth you have there, now you're playing, him instead of Carl Davis, who came off the street, and Fedarian Mathis, who's been inactive, right? So you're putting another guy in there who you would hope can generate some plays for you. And I do think, like you said, the big thing is taking away the ball more, and that's something they haven't done very well enough of, for sure. And that's why the Luvu drop hurts. But listen, Frankie's better at grabbing quarterbacks than football. So I think there's some things that I'll look at. See, here you go. Did you see this one?
Oh, shout out to my mom.
There you go.
Hold on. I think that's her because the picture it's somebody else. I saw a comment that was like, must love lobster, because I can see my lobster flag right there. That lobster buoy, that's her profile picture. That's why I think it's actually her, not someone like just doing a joke. Is because that was my grandfather's lobster buoy, and I don't think anybody else would know that. So I feel pretty confident that's my mom. So my family is all from this island in Maine called Bailey Island. Shout out to George Johnson. He was my grandfather. That was his lobster buoy.
Well, I'm glad you didn't cuss on this podcast then.
Not yet. There's still time.
Not much time. We'll go over another 2 minutes or so, but I am curious, like, how you would assess, again, like the 3 games left. A lot of people worried about, you see, like, this is obviously a tough game. It's tough for this team to play Dallas. Do you feel it does come down to the Atlanta game, or do you feel like, that this team is in really good shape?
I think the team is in good shape, but like I've learned enough over the last 4 years that like you can't just say it comes down to one game, because this is the NFL. Weird things happen all the time. Right. You could beat Philly and lose to Atlanta, and then then it comes down to week 18. So like to me, like that's been the moral of the NFL all year. I mean, yes, like you want to beat Atlanta, you want to get that dub on national TV, because that if you win that game, you're pretty good. But and I know it's a new era and there are new coaches and players here, but I'm just wary of making a proclamation like that at this point.
Well, it's also like, because when you watch, you're like, they had to hold on to beat the Saints. Then you watch the Falcons almost lose it on a Hail Mary. Like they couldn't put the Raiders away with their castaway Desmond Ridder, and Kirk Cousins is not playing well. The question for that game, even, I know we're looking ahead a little bit here, but is Michael Penix starting a quarterback for them? Like that's going to be an interesting one for sure. But I don't know. I like their chances. They're in a good shape, and I think, as we've all done the tiebreaker stuff, like the NFC West. If they tie with the team in the NFC West, they're in. So they're in good shape there. And again, like someone else here is saying, like with the Dallas in the last game, who knows, like, is Micah Parsons going to play? We'll see, you know what I mean? Like there's going to be so many things that are going on that I think it may be a little bit of a, maybe it's the Brett Favre getting sacked by Strahan kind of situation where it just sets up for them. But shoot, if they handle their business against the Falcons, it could be that they don't even need to play anybody in that last game. So, except for
the fact that we're talking about this and the fact that like I saw a couple Giants beat writers talking about the race for the number 1 pick. And I was just like, this is the first time I feel like in a long time that I have not been paying attention to the draft order standings at all. Like I don't, if the season ended today, I have no idea where the Commanders would pick. It doesn't matter. And like, what a change it is to be like, oh, could the Commanders rest their starters in week 18?
I know. Wild. Well, it's very weird because shoot, even the last couple of years, they'd be in a playoff hunt, but you kind of felt like, they were at one point, they're 7-5, like, hey, they're in good shape. And then they collapse. And then they play the Giants at home in a night game. It's like their chance to grab the fans back, and they lay a massive egg. It's like, but you knew that even that year, like they were kind of sputtering by that point. And so you're right. Like this, it always turned to, you know what? They still don't have their quarterback. You know what? They still have blah, blah, blah. Whereas now, like, they have their quarterback. Now the question is, what else do they need to not just make the playoffs, but then to be a legitimate threat? And, here's the funny thing with that. Like the matchups are everything. If you match up with Philly in the first round, well, you would have played them 2 times already. You know them very well. They know you, but the intimidation factor is gone. If you play Detroit in the first round, that defense is banged up, and now that's a really good offense. Not saying they beat them, but everything comes down to a matchup. And like, how are you playing in that second week of January? Like that's the key. So, point is to get in there. But again, like what we're talking about now, that what the conversations now, Sam, are all like, was that win good enough? Are they good enough to win a game in the playoffs versus are they frauds? You know what I mean? Like, or who are you going to pick? Right. And, is this guy coming back? Is this coach coming back? Like that's what we've been, it's a different hand we've been dealt this year.
Right, and I think that like that's why you want to see them finish strong, which they haven't done in a long time. Not just on Duran, like previous administrations. Like you want to see them finish strong. You want to see like, okay, even if they lose in the first round, does Jaden have a good game? Can he show that he's going to build, on toward the future? And he has, shown a lot of promise so far. But you want to end on a high note. Even obviously, excuse me, Robert's rookie year did not end on a high note. You want to hit that offseason with momentum to go into free agency, to go into the draft, things like that.
It's the understatement of the year that his rookie year did not end on a high note. But yeah, and the other thing that's last thing here too for me, the difference part about this year too is the consistency from start to finish. Right, I haven't covered a year like that in a long, long time where they've been most of the time. They're like, oh, they're 4-5. Then they win 5 in a row. They won 7 in a row with Robert. They won, like they had this late in 15. They won, 4 or 5 in a row to make the playoffs. It's always been that hot finish that gets them there. Even in Ron's first year, that's what it was. And so this is the first time where I feel like from start to finish, they've done pretty much what they should. They've beaten the bad teams. They haven't beaten the good teams, the really good teams yet. They've been close, but they've done what they should, except for the Dallas game. That's the only time all year I felt like you needed to win that one, right? You really should have won that one. But otherwise, they've done what they should, and they put themselves in position to make the postseason. So anyway, Sam, let's end it there. So why don't you tell people where they can find Sammy TikTok? Let's go.
Yeah, TikTok, Instagram, X, Blue Sky, Sam, SAM, the number 4TR. I'm on all of them. I made a bet that Kime would join Blue Sky by December 1st. He hasn't. Lost. It's December 17th. Honestly, it's a tough look for me.
It was a tough one for me on November 30th, and the first time I thought about Blue Sky is when you just said it now. So yeah, I'm still.
You can always find me. I'm repping the team. You can find me in the Washington Post. Anywhere else.
There you go, Sam. Thanks a lot. Always enjoy it.
Thanks, guys.
And thanks to everybody else for tuning in. I'll be back, I think, on Thursday with another one. I'll be back on Thursday with another one. Wednesday night, Thursday. There you go. I'll talk to you next time.